I appreciate you taking the time for us to do this. I thought it might be useful, Jean, for me to give a bit of context because you've had this in bits and pieces. At Action Research Plus, it's about a year ago, we began a collab on education and teaching. And so we have 8, 9 faculty members at universities in North America, Asia, and Europe. Our intention as a group is to explore the possibility of using action research to transform how teaching and learning occurs. And so we've been having conversations about that, engaged in various projects, inquiring into what is action research, what do we mean by it, what's our shared meaning. And we will soon be opening this collab to other educators, actually from pre-K through doctoral programs.
Wow.
And our intention is to focus intently on andragogy or pedagogy, developing and making available to one another teaching materials and webinars, and advocating for action research, for institutional embrace of action research, since there's resistance in some places. And finally, we're hoping that as a result of that we can transform education. So we wrote this book chapter. It was one of the projects for this collab, and you've read that. And the question that we had there was, how is it that we can help our students learn to do action research? So you've had a chance to read that. We've talked a bit about it. But what we'd really like here is a student's perspective. So the faculty have had their say. So Jean, it's your opportunity. How was that? What was that article like for you?
I have to share, before coming on today, I thought to myself, depending on different times of reading this for me, I've had different reactions, which I find really interesting. And I think during the earlier stage, I was very much connected with this idea of the connection and disconnection theme that was highlighted. And at the time, I felt like I myself was going through that journey of trying to navigate the two spaces. And then I think just as part of this, I've read it again. And this time what's coming to me is about how do we integrate a little bit of that bridging that this article is proposing in terms of helping students to become action researchers. So I think even for me, I felt more on the isolated side, and now I've started to integrate some of this into my daily practice. So it's an interesting journey, and that's an important thing to sort of help students through at all times of the journey. The journey continues at different times when they're in research, when they're in practice, when they're taking on a socialization with another group. How do we bring all of this to practice and all these different concepts? So for me, what I found was the idea of disconnection jumped out for me before, and now the connection is stronger, is speaking stronger to me.
Got it. So how do you integrate this?
Yes, that is the question. That is the question.
And if I heard you correctly, Jean, it was integration. Looking back, it might have been integration from the get-go. Is that right? From when you first started coursework?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's what I'm going to say about sort of how do you navigate those spaces, and how do you eventually be able to have a space that encompasses both, because I think they're both necessary, like the yin and the yang. I think one thing that if I reflect back on my own research, is that I was very much aware that this was going to be a growing and possibly transformative experience for myself. I knew that going in. And I knew that the way that this research is set up in the setting, working with agencies that are community centers that are helping the homeless families and children, there was going to be an impact on the family. So there's definitely the first person and the third person. We have work going on that would impact both sides. And I think what I didn't really pay attention, and I wasn't able to surface as much and spend as much time on it, is about the interpersonal. And I think I had a chance to do that with you immediately because this project came about, and I had a chance to explore with you some of the relationship and dynamics that we didn't have time to talk about.
Right.
And I think that now that I've had some distance from my own research, I think that there's something very powerful about the dyadic relationship that can be nested within the context of research, that even if it may not be the focus of the research, it's worth paying attention to, because there's a lot of power that can really have the impact of change on what you're doing inside yourself and outside.
You know, last night I spoke with Naz,
Ah,
and she told me she was speaking with you today.
yes,
And
yes.
I was delighted to hear that. So I told her about your piece where you reflected on our relationship during the dissertation process using a lens of power.
Yep.
And she said to me that prior to my mentioning that, that would never have occurred to her to think that way. But what's interesting to me is that she said she saw me as her boss.
Yeah.
Not that I acted that way, but that she needed me to be that so she could be accountable to someone. So what was curious to me, Jean, today I was thinking about that, of course, and I wonder what metaphor other students use for the dissertation chair. Does one come to mind for you?
I think for me, seeing my Asian background sort of comes to the surface here. You're very much you're the master of the subject in the process. And I lean on you like a sensei, the all-knowing teacher in the Asian tradition. And I knew that always that if I had any question that you would be able to give me clarity. So very much the sage in the process. And I think to some extent, I'll always feel there's a part of me that believes that you will have that place of sageness in my life. That'll be part of our relating. And that for me is not so much the power, it's more the regard that I give to the person that you are.
So how's regard different from power? Because when you've said that to me early on, you spoke about sensei.
Yeah.
And I've always referred to me as Dr. Leahy until very recently. And it's a bit of a double bind in a way, because I realize that one part of me needs to be sage or sensei for you, right? But especially if we're doing action research, also need to be a collaborator.
Correct.
And in some ways, something close to a peer. Well, there's an acknowledgement that we're not peers yet, or we weren't peers when you were going through the process. But that is the goal. And so to relate in a peer mode, right?
there's a space in pure mode to acknowledge the higher level knowledge or farther, deeper experience. And I think that's important.
Okay.
It would be for me. And I think the collaboration comes from acknowledging one's familiarity, expertise, strength
Hmm.
in the certain domain. And collaboration comes with being able to leverage the strengths of multiple parts and many peoples and multiple systems. So I think in that sense, it doesn't encumber or prevent collaboration.
Okay.
Um, and I want to share that I had a sense of liberation when we began to explore this idea of power. And less is, for me, it's not the power that is in the way now. It's about being able to modulate this sense of love and regard and respect that balances as part of the relationship. And for me, that is the question that we had earlier on about what do you do from the disconnection with the connection? How do you bring that together? And I think for me, that's part of what I'm going through right now. There's a modulation going on between us every time we converse now. There's a more ease of comfort for me, more ease in terms of sharing what I'm thinking about, and ease in articulating the things perhaps might be contrary to what you think. But it's that love and that regard that's at the depth of my heart holds. It doesn't waver. It's very steady now as I'm having this exchange with you.
You know, of course, I hope I'm not deflecting here.
Nope.
But what I'm thinking about is there's this dynamic between entering into relationship or entering into relation and setting at a distance. So it's another way of saying connecting and disconnecting.
Correct. Yes.
And the quality of the connection certainly has increased over time, right? And as I've listened to you, it seems like the capacity or the comfort to disconnect and differentiate has increased over time. So you becoming the sensei, right?
In my own domain.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I see. I think what I appreciate in this moment is you're helping me recognize that and make the transition. And I think that this is the kind of conversations, this is the power of interpersonal relationship, I think, that happens between student and chair, or even just between two people, when they can really take a moment and recognize each other and recognize what is going on in the relationship. It really helps with the learning process, teaching process, collaboration process, anything that's social that requires people. I think that I realized in the research that I've done, the process I've gone through, that this part is so powerful. And it would have helped me counterbalance the dyadic power that I was feeling, which was overpowering, when it didn't have to.
It would have helped had we had these kinds of conversations?
Absolutely.
Okay. What I wonder about, Jean, is, so there's the sensei, there's the boss, right?
Yep.
There's the master. That's another word that's come out here. There's a chair. And I've never thought about that literally, right? But there's the chair. And we've spoken a little bit about the notion of apprentice. So the apprentice is the protege to the mentor, or the apprentice is apprentices to the master, right?
Right. I am very attracted to the idea of apprentice because I think it works in both Eastern and Western worlds under certain developmental environment. So we have to kind of frame that specifically.
When you think about the apprenticeship model, right?
Yeah.
So that was a dominant model once upon a time, for at least craft education, right? And then it kind of went away. But you said it's time for it to return. Why?
Because I think the cycles of learning and development have been contracted with technology. Everything has become more compressed. So you're not going as deep on anything that you're learning. So the only way to really fully experience and learn and inculcate and internalize would be through practice. And in this day and age, you learn from someone who knows. We can learn from videos, we can learn from books, we can learn from a webinar that condenses information from, I don't know, 2 books into 20 minutes. How much are you getting out of that? Only when you're watching and seeing it happen in action do you really realize what that means. So I think the apprentice model allows you to have that kind of learning experience. And of course, I believe that you do in the experiential learning. And so apprentice model can really bring that and enrich in someone's learning process if that was integrated into the education process. Because in the workplace, there is shadowing for a day or a week, but it isn't the person who you're hired to do the job. You're just shadowing someone to learn the culture and to learn, who sits where. You're not learning about the job. You learn it from a master, a sage, someone who's been certified, for example. Very much so. So I think it's a time for us to look at apprentice model in a hybrid way, not the traditional, something different that suits the environment.
What would it look like, Jean? What might it look like?
One simple thing that I think for students, very, very well-intentioned and aspiring and deep learner type, I think to have actually a term of apprentice built in somewhere into the curriculum, that gets the institution's time. It's money well spent. I'm happy to do that as a student. And to know that that's my time to learn experientially. I get to decide what it is I want to do. And that could be service learning or anything else, but it's actually an apprentice built into the course, into the curriculum. That's probably the easiest entry point in an educational setting, in my opinion.
So would it be like a residency for a physician?
Very much so.
So,
But it's a course. It's a course. It doesn't have to parallel track a dissertation process. It doesn't require a chair to have to take on multiple roles if unable to manage. But it's something that's baked in the process, into the institution.
and so it could be a course, it could be a couple courses, it could be a list of competencies to master by learning and practice that could run in parallel with courses, right? but that there is some, what you're suggesting is there is some formal apprenticeship component, which is missing right now. So we don't really have action learning. We don't
Yes,
have people, we don't have students acting and then reflecting on it.
right.
They're reflecting on somebody else's reflection on their actions, right? And we know that action learning is powerful for adults,
Right.
but we don't do very much experiential learning, and students then go out to the workplace, and the biggest complaint we get is that universities are not preparing students for work.
Exactly.
And
And so
so
I
we
think,
have, I'm sorry, Jean, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I
I
apologize.
was
Go
going
ahead.
to say, so the answer, the institutional answer is creating competency models and measuring competencies in courses, but we're measuring thought experiments, not real experiences.
Right. And I think that this is something where if an apprentice model can be embedded into a curriculum supported by an institution, um, we can we can have measurements that better reflect the experience of the students, which complement some of the other institutional measures that need to be supported. So it becomes an additive, but not a subtractive.
I
Um,
love that. I love that. Going back to a couple things you said in our conversation. So it's integration, right?
correct.
It also involves the second person kinds of inquiry, the relational that you've emphasized is so important. We don't teach that,
No.
right? And few schools teach or assess the person's capacity to relate to other human beings.
Well, and I would even say that you can't really teach someone how to be reflective. You do. We are doing reflection. Um, and so I think that speaks to what was not that what I overlooked and didn't spend more time on is to really have the courage to explore that interpersonal connection, because I let it be a disconnection that sits as a necessity in the process when I could have moved it towards the connective parts of all of this. Um, and I've certainly worked really hard as part of my own research to set up to make the connections necessary with the agencies and with the right contacts. And I think that that type of attention can need to be part of someone, a practitioner's focus, competency, toolbox, knowledge, body of knowledge, as it were. They need to be aware and know what is it like to do it, even if it's uncomfortable at first.
And they need to know what it's like to do it, and they need to demonstrate the capacity to connect, but also the capacity to detach,
Correct?
right? And
Very
stand on
well.
their own and
Yeah.
know when to do that. One of the things I'm struck by, you said a few moments ago, um, we going back to our relationship. So if we had an apprenticeship component to a doctoral degree, for example, in organizational leadership, part of that component would be, I don't like the word master, I don't know if there's a better word, but the sensei, for lack of a better word, the sensei,
Sage.
the sage, and the student having reflecting on the experience of their relationship, because that's one of the things that I guess that I've seen is missing. So it's learning. So there's process, there's task, there's outcome that the student would learn experientially, but it would also be important for that student to reflect on themselves and how they're present in that work and on their relationship with others, and especially the relationship with the sage, if you will.
Yeah.
Sage and student might well, sage and apprentice, might take the time to talk about their relationship, because in fact, I follow Gestalt theory, whatever's going to show up with that student's clients or students or whomever, is going to present itself in the relationship between sage and apprentice. This is good, Jean.
It's been fun. Another discovery for our ways of connection. I'm really enjoying this.
So if you reflect on this experience, what are you left with, this conversation?
You know, I have to share now even more honestly.
Go ahead.
There were times in previous conversations as a student, I left feeling somewhat reduced. And another way to look at that, it's really just, there's just so much more that I need to be learning and you know, a little bit of self-blaming. But more recently, all of our conversations leave me feeling very full, where I think, wow, you know, we didn't have to have a solution. You know, all we're just so at ease to be able to, I still take in everything you share, and nothing about the way you communicate has changed. You're not really telling me more, but it's the way it's me knowing what to do with the information and how to react and respond and be present for myself and to value myself. I feel fullness, bountifulness, as I reflect about how I'm feeling right now in this moment. It's full and it's great.
That's great. And I'm really curious about, you didn't use the word diminished. What was the word that you used?
Reduced.
Reduced. Reduced. And you know, I'm really aware of that and concerned about that, so that when I give a student feedback, for example, as I did on a literature review earlier this week, I'll now use this sensei image, and it could have been that I had a bamboo pole and I was slapping him across his hands. And I don't know when that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there are times when I need to say, you know what, you have really missed the mark. And we've had conversations about this. We've been through step-by-step how to do it, etc. And this ain't it. Go do it and come back to me when it's done. And you know, Jean, it's knowing I hold back from doing that because I don't want to undermine someone's self-efficacy, right?
Yeah.
And I want to build them up, and I want them leading, moving smarter, or feeling smarter. So it's a matter of balancing the support and the challenge.
Yeah, if I can maybe share something in that, what you said about that, I know that I've experienced myself with my clients. So what I think I found that really works in my setting, and again, this speaks to what we started with, this idea of interpersonal connection, which is very powerful. You have a connection with the person, not as the teacher, the sage, the chair, the master, or the faculty member, but simply that you're a person who is just sharing this struggle right now, and if you can bracket that, and just be able to find other connections that are more confidence building, you can use that experience to counterbalance for the moments when you do need to let this person know that they're just not on the mark. Because at that point, their attention isn't going to be all focused on what they're not doing well.
Right.
What they're going to be able to interpret for themselves is, I trust this person, and this person has journeyed with me and understands the struggles, and they're really helping to point out the areas that I need to make changes. And it gives that person the courage to say, God, I feel like I just want to give up right now, which is something you never want to say to your chair.
Um,
A student who knows the importance of the time that a chair is spending, you don't want to say, I want to give up. You go to the therapist and say, I want to give up. But you always come back and you say, I want to try harder. I will try, and I'll keep trying. But they're standing in their own way of that, because they're not able to say, but really, I just need to feel like you have the confidence in me to be able to do this. And I think the students don't hear that when they're being guided and corrected. All they know is, I've made a mistake, and why am I not getting this? And how long is it going to take for me to get this? So maybe I should give up. So I think it's being able to tap into the connection and the disconnection. You want to leave the students alone to do what they have to do, but you also have to connect with them without losing your sense of power in the role. And the student has to do the same. I mean, this has been all about me learning how to work, because honestly, you have instructed and conducted yourself very consistently all throughout, in my relationship, in relationship with others, in all of our study groups. You're very consistent in the way that you mentor, coach, teach, and share what you know with us. So for me, in this situation, it's about how I can manage the connection and the disconnection.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a great lesson for me.
That's great. And so part of my job as sensei in the future would be awareness of that, how to support the student in the way that they interact with me. And one of the things I'm hearing you say, which I think is really good, is that there are times when I can relate to the student as just another human being, where we even mark it and say, all right, let's step out of roles here for a minute and just have a conversation like two people having a cup of coffee.
Exactly.
Mark.
And I think you've done that with me on occasion. You don't have to do that very much with me, because I always stay in my box.
Okay.
But I've noticed at times when I'm stuck, and you notice I'm stuck, so you do something different to help me get unstuck. Yeah, it's and that's part of relating that also needs to be part of the student chair stage apprentice relationship. It's what you would have between two people. It's the dance. It's a beautiful dance that you have to figure out. You just have to figure out if it's rumba or disco, or hard rock. How you're going to bump up against each other.
You know what's exciting to me about this conversation, Jean? Some little ahas I'm having. Initially, I was thinking, all right, what's the solution? How do we bring an apprenticeship model into doctoral education? How do we do that?
Right.
Let's come up with a solution.
Right.
But to use a technical term, the role frame, the way that the person thinks about his or her role, whether it's chair or mentor, right, or sage, that combined with a discrete apprenticeship module, if you will, or an additional piece that's around apprenticeship, and it's like, what's the metaphor? What's the image? I'm going to use the word chair, that the chair has for their role. And then, Naz's comment to me yesterday had me be really curious about asking students, a chair is like a what? And Naz would have said like a boss. He would say like a sensei. And so there's probably, regardless of what the language is, a chair is like a master for an apprentice. And what I really like about that is it elevates the craft and the relationship
At the same time.
at the same time, and that the theory comes in just in time when it's needed in service of producing a result. I don't know, what are your thoughts as well? So this has been really helpful, Jean. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something. This is so interesting. We have conversations that really don't end. They can be picked up at another time. But I'll say this: the dyadic relationship, framed in a different way in the context of what is going on within research, because it ties into this role modeling that we disappear in the education realm. Role modeling is important. How one learns, how one teaches, how one changes. We make that invisible to ourselves. And we need to bring that to the fore, into the consciousness, and to establish a level of comfort to talk about that. And I think the meaning making is connecting with in a relational context. Meaning making doesn't happen inside of a situation, a box, a protainer. It's relative to all these other moving parts and participants. So yeah, I think that the integration of all that we're saying here that you and I have shared makes for what brings together the disconnection, the connection, the theory and the practice, sort of the dyadic forces or opposing forces that are going on. We don't have to order it. Yeah, we just want to find ways to work with the evolving chaos that is going on. It needs to be that, and constantly creating the new frame of reference. And I think educators are potentially role modeling themselves to an older paradigm that is no longer relevant. So action research can help catapult and project into the future of what is the paradigm for us in the future to get there. And in the process to experiment with apprenticeship, with models that were outside a paradigm and the framework of the education as it began.
I got it. I love it. I love it. So what I like what you're saying, Jean, is that we don't need an answer or a formula right now. We need to know some of the things that are in the soup, right?
Ingredients.
The ingredients.
Yes.
And as the pot's bubbling, to be aware of those, and that'll be sufficient.
Yes.
That's and a really
yes. Action Research Collab does not have to produce transformation or outcome, but it needs to be right in midst of the action, helping figure out what's the different recipes and what are the different ingredients that we can be using. That's the collab to me. If we were putting it in a cookbook, it's that pot, a space where you can just do no wrong, follow no conventions, and have nothing that limits us other than we're openly with our hearts wanting to help the next generation of the research, of the changes that are going to come about. But in the moment, it doesn't have to be driven by specific criteria or outcome. It just simply needs to be that we want to be learning, leading, and changing at the same time within myself, with the person I'm next to, and within the collab, and see if that can happen. That's something that we don't have that. We have no knowledge of what that looks like and what that is and what it feels like. A collab would do a lot of good for those action researchers to really be able to learn and to change and to lead for themselves within an environment like that.
That's great. Thanks, Jean. I appreciate it as usual. And as you said, our conversations never complete. We just pick them up the next time we're together.
That's right.
So
No,
thanks.
I really enjoyed this.